Hello, folks. Thank you for tuning in to the Federalist Files. On today's show, we're going to be going over Federalist number 68, The Mode of Electing the President. It is titled, written by Alexander Hamilton, March 12th, 1788. Topics include the method of elector selection and the responsibility they hold. Pretty much the Electoral College, really, he talks about in this one specifically. So in this paper, Hamilton, he summarizes how the chief magistrate would be elected as in the president. He characterizes it, and I quote, "The mode of appointment of the chief magistrate of the United States is almost the only part of the system of any consequence which has escaped without severe censure or which has received the slightest mark of approbation from its opponents. The most plausible of these, who has appeared in print, has even deigned to admit that the election of the president is pretty well guarded. I venture somewhat further, and hesitate not to affirm, that if the manner of it be not perfect, it is at least excellent. It unites in an eminent degree all the advantages the union of which was to be wished for." End quote. So this one is, wow, it's such a drastic difference from today, modern day times, to 1789, I think is when they approved the Constitution. They like the idea of the Electoral College then. Now, they've been trying to abolish the Electoral College now for the last 20-something years, at least. They want this idea of a popular vote, which then at that point, there's no point in federalism, there's no point in sovereignty of states. We might as well just be one top-down ran country if that's the way we're going to do things from here on out. And it's this idea of the idea of the Constitution, really. You have a decentralization of government. There's no centralized. You hear this general phrase that's kind of uttered by a lot of conservatives where they'll say, "Oh, we're not a huge fan of the centralized government and big centralized government. We want a smaller government or less powerful government." You hear the same thing from libertarians. The left wants a centralized government. They want a bigger government entity. They want to hold more power and have more say in the economy, right? You also hear this idea of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin. People, especially Bitcoin specifically, they say it's the decentralization of finance. And that's the reason people like it, is because there's no real entity, one strong, powerful entity holding all of the power to this financial system, like there is with the current dollar system that we have now, the US dollar. There is an entity, there's the government, which I think I just read. And, folks, I've record these beforehand, so I just read that they're talking about a budget of $6 trillion. Usually the budget's around $4 trillion. We're adding another 50% to the budget. So the government just keeps printing money. They're going to continue to print money, and now that's a centralized program. The US dollars is totally centralized by the Fed. It is determined by fiscal policy passed through our government, and then it's kind of passed on through the monetary policy of the Fed. When I say the Fed, I mean the Federal Reserve, which was actually created by Woodrow Wilson. He was by far, Woodrow Wilson, I think, may have been the worst president of all time. But yeah, so he had a lot of progressive programs that he started that now today, like the income tax, for example, Woodrow Wilson, we have him to thank for a lot of the problems, just like we do with FDR for a lot of the problems that we have now with some of our Social Security-like programs. But yeah, so we have this decentralization. That is really the point of the Constitution. The essence of it is you're going to have this government, and it's going to be a limited government. And at the same time, it's also going to be a decentralized government where we want all the powers to kind of be passed around, so there's no collusion in an attempt to overthrow the rights and the freedoms of the people. So Hamilton next, he asserts, and that's really the point of this paper specifically, he talks about, and you'll understand, he talks about the electors and the way in which they will vote and how they're really not connected to any other government entity. They can't be a senator, they can't be a House of Rep member, they can't be a governor. So there's a real hands-off approach. This is supposed to be as decentralized as possible. So Hamilton next, he asserts that the men charged as electors are to consist of, and I quote, "A small number of persons selected by their fellow citizens from the general mass will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations." End quote. So really, they're just going into, when you go to elect who you want for president, you vote, whoever the majority is in that state, then the legislative branch, what happens is you have a Democrat and you have a Republican set of electors. So in this state, New Jersey, let's say, because I'm not exactly sure what the numbers are, let's say we have 15 electoral votes, which I think that's how many we have. We have 15 electoral votes. You have people go and vote for who they want their president to be. Let's say the majority in this state, overwhelmingly, they vote for Biden. You're going to have 15 electors that are Democrats. Then you're also going to have 15 electors that are Republicans. Two different sets of electors. Whoever it is that is voted for the president in that state, the legislative branch, the legislature of that state, verifies which electors they're going to send to vote. So they would say, it's Biden, okay, we're going to send all of our 15 Democrat electors to vote, and they're going to go cast their ballots, and they're going to vote for Biden because there's times where these electors will vote against what party they're supposed to vote for, but they're supposed to be like registered Democrats. There's very few times where this has happened, and I don't remember the exact name. It's called something Electors. I don't remember the name of it. In some states, actually, there's a criminal penalty for doing this, for voting against what the constituency says. I wish I could recall the name right now, but I can't. So that's the way the system here kind of works. So the people themselves vote for these electors to directly represent them, and they're not really tied to anybody but the people themselves. So Hamilton outlines that there will be a body of electors selected by the people of every individual state and will carry out their individual duties in their state rather than all in one place convened at one time in order to avoid the heats and ferments of the people. So this is where he goes on to mention this. He states, and I quote, "It was also peculiarly desirable to afford as little opportunity as possible to tumult and disorder. This evil was not least to be dreaded in the election of a magistrate who was to have so important an agency in the administration of the government as the President of the United States. But the precautions which have been so happily concerted in the system under consideration promise an effectual security against this mischief. The choice of several to form an intermediate body of electors will be much less apt to convulse the community with any extraordinary or violent movements than the choice of one who was himself to be the final object of the public wishes. And as the electors chosen in each state are to assemble and vote in the state in which they are chosen, this detached and divided situation will expose them much less to heats and ferments which might be communicated from them to the people than if they were all to be convened at one time in one place." End quote. So really what he's saying, you can have situations of blackmail, you can have threats that come in, but how are you going to threaten 15 different electors? Is what he's saying. If we held all this power in just one specific person, then they would be much more, they'd have much better of a chance of being corrupted. But in this system where we have 15 different electors, it's going to be more difficult to do so. And then also having them decentralized vote in their specific states is not only is it more feasible, because at this time, just for the travel distances, it was probably difficult to get from one place to another, but it was also smarter to have it set up that way because then people aren't going to fight about it. There's not going to be some sort of huge, riot at the casting of those ballots or those votes. So the convention feared of outside influence in the elections. He stated, and I quote, "They have not made the appointment of the president to depend on any pre-existing bodies of men who might be tampered with beforehand to prostitute their votes, but they have referred it in the first instance to an immediate act of the people of America, to be exerted in the choice of persons for the temporary and sole purpose of making the appointment." End quote. So that's really the point here. The electors, the most important part is they didn't want them to prostitute their votes. They didn't want them to be swayed by some sort of, or tampered with by some sort of despotic body or something of that nature, factional violence. But this is referred as the immediate act of the people themselves. They directly represent the people. And this is only a temporary appointment for the sole purpose. Literally, their only purpose is to do this one thing, and then that's it. You're out of here. And then he goes on to mention, I think, where, I don't know if he mentions next. Hamilton, next, he asserts that no current person serving as a senator, representative, or other person holding a place of trust under the United States can be of the number or members of electors to ensure the avoidance of corruption. in this case. He states, and I quote, "No senator, representative, or other person holding a place of trust or profit under the United States can be of the number of the electors. Thus, without corrupting the body of the people, the immediate agents in the election will at least enter upon the task free from any sinister bias. Their transient existence and their detached situation already taken care of or taken notice of afford a satisfactory prospect of their continuing so to the conclusion of it." End quote. So really their position, he's saying that it's an impermanent position. It's there literally just to vote. And because of that, it's a safeguard, and we're not going to have the House of Representatives do this. We're also not going to have the senators or anybody else that makes any profit under the United States. No one else in the federal government or even in the state government really is going to do this position. That is it. It'll be, your blacksmith from down the street. He's going to run. He'll get elected to the position as an elector, or what have you. So he argues that the electors will be detached. This affords an extra layer of security because this corruption would need to be dispersed across the 13 states, which would require a considerable amount of time, effort, and means to do this. So Hamilton, he claims that the president should be independent for his continuance of office of all others with the exception of the people themselves. This will be secured through the electors, which will be deputed by society for one sole purpose of making the important choice. So he goes on to state, and I quote, "Another and no less important desideratum was that the executive should be independent for his continuance in office on all but the people themselves. He might otherwise be tempted to sacrifice his duty to his complaisance for those whose favor was necessary to the duration of his official consequence. This advantage will also be secured by making his re-election to depend on all special body of representatives deputed by the society for the single purpose of making the important choice." End quote. So, once again, you're going to have these electors that they're just going to handle this. This is a short paper. It's not really that long. There's really not much to it. And then he's going to go on to some more important stuff here where he's going to specifically talk about how the vice president is going to be, the president of the Senate, and kind of how that works out. And if there isn't a majority, and this actually is pretty important, if there isn't a majority vote in terms of the Electoral College, if you ever watch the election coverage, there's always, it has to hit 270. You got to hit 270 to win. If you are below 270, then it actually gets kicked to the House of Reps because now you do not have the majority Electoral College votes. If you don't have those, the House of Representatives actually determines who the president's going to be, which I'll get to. So next he states, and I quote, "The people of each state shall choose a number of persons as electors equal to the number of senators and representatives of such state in the national government who shall assemble within the state and vote for some fit person as president. Their votes thus given are to be transmitted to the seat of the national government, and the person who may happen to have a majority of the whole number of the votes will be the president." End quote. So how many senators do you have in your state? Every single state has 2. New Jersey, let's just say for sake of this argument, we have 13 members in the House of Representatives. So that gives us 15 electoral votes. That's the way that the system works. He lays that out. That is the Electoral College, okay? And then next, he says, whoever has the majority of the whole number of the votes will be the president. Right now, currently, the majority, you got to reach 270 to reach the majority of electoral votes. If you don't have that, then he's going to lay out how the House of Representatives are then tasked to vote for the best qualified candidate. So Hamilton notes that if there isn't a majority, the House of Representatives shall vote the best qualified candidate. And then he also concludes that the vice president shall be picked through the people at large as well on a concurrent ticket. If a tie ensues, the House of Representatives will make the decision. So he states, and I quote, "But as a majority of the votes might not always happen to center on one man, and as it might be unsafe to permit less than a majority to be conclusive, it is provided that in such a contingency the House of Representatives shall select out the candidates who shall have the 5 highest number of votes, the man who in their opinion may be best qualified for the office." End quote. So I don't really know if this ever had to I want to say the House had to do this maybe once or twice before. I'm not 100% sure. Now, are we going to have 5 of the high? I mean, at this time, they must have thought that a lot of people would run for president, because president really wasn't a position that held that much power. Nowadays, the presidential election is a huge deal. People buy their signs, they put it on their lawns, they slap that bumper sticker on their car. I mean, it's a huge deal, whoever the president's going to be. There's usually always 2 very solid candidates, and then there's always kind of like the Green Party, Libertarian Party person in the background. But there's never really that close of an election like that where you're going to need to select the first 5 people. It's really going to just be 2 people. But at this time, they must have thought that a lot of people would be running for president, and there would be an actual kind of balance to this, one person gets 20%, one person gets 20%, the other gets 30% of the vote, something like that, of that nature. But, that's obviously not the case now today. So that being said, the current system doesn't hold elections for vice presidents. They're on the ticket of the party nomination of president. The vice president shall act as the deciding vote if Senate ever has a tie. So, years ago, the way it worked was you voted for who the president was. Whoever was in second place ended up being the vice president. They changed that rule. It's not like that anymore. Now it's the vice president runs with the president on the ticket, because there's a couple problems with if you had a Republican president and then, whoever was second in votes was a Democrat vice president. The Democrat vice president would be trying to overthrow the Republican president the entire time. It would definitely be a slippery slope indeed. So, and kind of lays out the vice president shall be the acting deciding vote in the Senate. The vice president is the president of the Senate. So if there's a 50-50 vote, right now, like there's a 50-50 split in the Senate, then you have Kamala Harris coming through, and she's the deciding vote, really. And that's currently how it is, unfortunately. So next it goes on, and this is the very last quote. He states, and I quote, "The appointment of an extraordinary person as vice president has been objected to as superfluous, if not mischievous. It has been alleged that it would have been preferable to have authorized the Senate to elect out of their own body an officer answering that description. But 2 considerations seem to justify the ideas of the convention in this respect. One is that to secure at all times the possibility of a definite resolution of the body, it is necessary that the president should have only a casting vote." So I think this is interesting too. They were saying, okay, well, why don't we just have the president of the Senate voted amongst the senators themselves, and but then that at the same time that would disenfranchise then the vote of the people that live in that specific state, whatever state that senator is from, because now he can only vote when there's a tie at that point. So there's it disenfranchises the people that live in that specific state end up losing their power, and they're really not being represented, which makes a lot of sense. So having the vice president in this position is really, I can't think of any other way, considering the way, if you look at the monarchs in Great Britain at this time, how much sway and how much power they still were able to hold in the Congress in a way, in voting. This is such a small amount of power for the president, for the executive branch to hold, that in a tie, which usually never happens in a tie, that they may have, a little inch of power in that regard. It did make sense, because otherwise then you're disenfranchising, 50% of a vote in one of the states if you have that person derived from the Senate that decides to be the president of the Senate. So that will conclude this one. I know this one's a pretty short one, because really wasn't much to it. It was about a page worth. But I greatly appreciate everybody for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe as always. Make sure you check out this weekend special coming up. Always some good stuff in the news that we got going on there. It's an interesting take. It's kind of, I had a friend that texted me about this. He said, I turned my dad on to your podcast. He was watching, the weekend special, and then after he was done watching it, a couple days later, Fox News was covering exactly what you were covering on your show. And I said, yeah, because I don't have to go through any entity. I don't have to get approval from. This is why the old stream media, the legacy media, this is why they will soon hopefully be extinct. The only thing that's keeping them afloat is some antitrust interests from the big corporations that own all of them. But I come through, I have all of this information that I get directly. I can get it the day of. I myself already I do all the work in my head. What is it? How, what am I covering? The continuity of this, how is this going to be organized? And then I really that day can come out with a show. the production isn't tremendous. I mean, I don't have 1080p, super 4K HD. I don't have the whole production team here. But really, what you guys are listening to, and this is what people crave, is the content that is involved, the opinions, the specific content, rather than me going to some sort of commercial break. I don't have commercials right now. I mean, in the future, may I have some commercials? Just keep the show free? Yeah, maybe if I were to get that big. But right now, I just straight shoot from the hip, and you learn all of this raw information and data. I leave all of the sources below. That doesn't happen when you watch regular TV, and Tucker Carlson is referring to something. Tucker Carlson's, I think he does a good job, but when he sits there and refers to something, he doesn't tell you the source to go get it from. He doesn't tell you what to Google, what to look it up on DuckDuckGo or anything like that. So I provide all that information in the description below every single time, where you can go and you can look it up yourself. You can read it. I leave all the things that I'm quoting directly on the screen, so you can read it and you can look at it yourself. And I cut the middleman out. I don't have to go through a production team. I don't have to make sure it's approved by any boss. I am my own boss. I come out here, I say it, and then I give you all of the resources that you need to look at it and then fight your liberal friends on it. So, yeah, that'll conclude this one. I greatly appreciate everyone for tuning in. As always, please check out that weekend special. Sometimes I get the news a little quicker out than some of these legacy media sources. So I will see you all on the weekend special. Thank you.